The clock on the security panel read 12 a.m. exactly. Caius Blackthorne wasn't supposed to be awake. He'd told himself he was done for the night. The bourbon was poured. The tie was loose. The city outside his penthouse window blazed 60 floors below like something that never needed to sleep. But the monitors were always on. And one of them just caught something that stopped him cold. The kitchen. The marble kitchen that cost more than most people's houses. And in the middle of it, the nanny, moving, not cleaning, not grabbing a midnight snack, not doing anything a nanny was supposed to be doing at this hour. Dancing. Caius set the bourbon glass down slowly. Didn't make a sound. Just watched. The man's name was Zion Vale. Hired 6 weeks ago after 4 other nannies quit inside of a month. Quiet, polite, kept his eyes down in a way that could have been humility or could have been something else entirely. Caius hadn't decided yet. But this wasn't humility. One hand held a feather duster stretched out like a performer's prop. The other arm cut through the kitchen air in a long, clean arc. His footwork was deliberate, controlled. The kind of movement that doesn't come from a YouTube tutorial or a high school recital. That came from years. Caius leaned forward in his chair. There was no music playing. None that Caius could hear through the monitor. But Zion moved like there was a full orchestra behind him. Every step timed. Every turn weighted. The marble floor beneath his feet might as well have been a stage in Milan. Hi viewers. Have you ever watched someone in a private moment and realized you were seeing a completely different person than the one you thought you knew? Caius had run a full background check on this man. Came back clean. Too clean. No extended family contacts. No social accounts. A work history that checked out on paper but left gaps. Quiet, unverifiable gaps. That his head of security, Marcus, had flagged twice already. Caius had overruled him both times. Because Orion liked Zion. And in 3 years, Orion hadn't liked anybody. The 7-year-old boy upstairs, the one who'd stopped speaking in full sentences after losing his other father, had laughed for the first time in months last Tuesday. Because of Zion. Because the nanny had taught him how to fold a paper crane, and then made 12 of them in a row, and hung them across the boy's bedroom ceiling like a paper sky. Caius had watched that on the monitors too. He was beginning to realize he watched Zion more than he wanted to admit. On the screen now, Zion's movements began to slow. The final turn came, graceful, unhurried, and then he stopped completely. Stood still in the center of the kitchen. And his face, that was the thing that got Caius. For 6 weeks, Zion Vale had walked through this penthouse wearing the same careful expression. Pleasant, measured, like a man reading lines he'd memorized long ago. But right now, alone at midnight with no one watching, or so he believed, his face was completely open. No performance, no caution, just peace. Real, quiet, heartbreaking peace. And then it shifted. Zion's eyes moved toward the dark window above the kitchen sink. His smile didn't fade slowly. It dropped. Like something heavy had just landed on his chest. He stared at his own reflection in the glass, and whatever he saw there wasn't good. The feather duster lowered. His jaw tightened. And for one long moment, Zion Vale looked like a man carrying something he'd never once set down. Caius didn't move. Didn't breathe loudly. Just watched the monitor with his hand flat on the desk and his bourbon untouched and cold. The nanny eventually turned away from the window, picked back up his cloth, started wiping down the counter like nothing had happened, like none of it was real. Caius sat back slowly. He'd built an empire by reading people. He could tell the difference between a man who was humble and a man who was hiding. He knew what it looked like when someone buried their real self so deep that even they forgot where they'd put it. Zion Vale wasn't humble. Zion Vale was hiding. The question that kept Caius frozen in his chair at midnight wasn't what the man was hiding. It was why someone with that kind of precision, that kind of trained elegance, that kind of guarded intelligence, was choosing to clean his kitchen. He reached for the bourbon finally, took one slow sip, and on the monitor, Zion finished wiping the counter, folded the cloth neatly, turned off the kitchen light, and disappeared down the hallway. Gone. Like a ghost that remembered it had a role to play. Caius stared at the now empty kitchen for a long time. Then he pulled up Zion's file again. And this time he called Marcus directly. "I need you to dig deeper," he said when the line picked up. "Whatever wall you hit last time, go through it." A pause. "How deep?" Marcus asked. Caius looked at the dark kitchen on the screen. "All the way." Orion Blackthorne hadn't spoken a full sentence to anyone in 11 months. The therapists called it selective emotional withdrawal. The nannies called it impossible. The rotating parade of childcare professionals who'd cycled through the penthouse over the past year called it, quietly between themselves on their way out, not worth the paycheck. Caius called it grief, because that's what it was. His son was 7 years old and already knew that love could vanish without warning. Already understood, in the wordless way children understand the worst things, that the person who was supposed to stay forever didn't. So Orion stopped trusting. Simple. Logical. Devastating. He stopped trusting adults. Stopped trusting routines. Stopped trusting that good things stayed good. He ate when Caius reminded him. Slept with the hall light on. Drew pictures of birds, always birds, in a sketchbook he wouldn't let anyone touch. Then Zion arrived. He didn't try to fix Orion. That was the first thing Caius noticed. And it was strange because every professional before him had shown up with a strategy. Plan. A gentle, laminated approach to reaching a traumatized child. Zion just showed up. First morning he made breakfast without asking what Orion liked. Put a plate of eggs, toast cut into triangles, and exactly 3 strawberries on the table. Sat down across from the boy and opened a book. Didn't speak. Didn't push. Didn't perform warmth. Just sat there. Orion stared at him for 4 full minutes. Then he picked up the fork. That was day 1. By day 5, Zion was teaching him to fold paper birds. Not cranes at first, just simple sparrows. Orion's fingers kept slipping and Zion never once sighed or redirected. He just waited and then quietly showed him again. By day 12, Orion was finishing his sentences. Not all of them. Not always. But enough. Caius watched it happen from the edges of rooms, through half-open doors, on the monitors when the guilt of hovering got too heavy. He didn't know what Zion was doing differently. He genuinely couldn't identify the technique. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe it was just Zion. Calm and steady the way a room is calm after a long storm. The moment that stopped Caius completely happened on a Thursday afternoon. He was passing the living room, jacket still on from a board meeting, and he heard Orion's voice. Then he heard Orion laugh. He actually stopped. The laugh came again. Bright, uncomplicated, a child's laugh. And something moved in Caius's chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. He looked through the doorway. Zion was on the floor, cross-legged, surrounded by paper birds in various stages of completion. Orion was standing on the couch cushion above him, something he absolutely was not allowed to do, and dropping finished cranes one at a time onto Zion's head. Zion kept reaching up to remove them with the most serious expression possible. Orion thought this was the funniest thing that had ever happened in the history of the world. Caius almost smiled. Almost. He was stepping back into the hallway when it happened. Orion's laughter settled into something softer. The boy climbed down from the couch cushion and sat close to Zion, closer than he sat to anyone, and leaned against his arm, quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice so small Caius almost missed it through the wall, "Papa." The room went absolutely still. Zion didn't move. Caius stopped breathing. Orion didn't look up, didn't seem to realize what he'd said. He just picked up another piece of paper and started folding. But Zion's face, Caius saw it through the gap in the door. For one unguarded second, the nanny's expression cracked completely open. Not with joy, not with discomfort, with something that looked a lot like recognition. Like the word had reached something in him that he'd locked up a long time ago. Then he blinked, and the mask came back. Caius walked away from the door slowly, his footsteps silent on the marble. By the time he reached his office and sat down, his hands were not entirely steady. He didn't know which unsettled him more. The fact that his son had just called the nanny papa, or the fact that Zion Vale had looked like he almost let himself believe it. It started with a wine bottle. Dinner service. Tuesday. Caius had a guest, Everett Malone, a business associate from Atlanta whose firm Caius was quietly considering acquiring. Everett liked to read people through what they ordered, so Caius let him pick the wine. Everett pulled a label from the rack near the kitchen entrance. Something Italian. Mid-tier shelf, deliberately understated, the kind of choice designed to test whether the host would correct him or stay quiet. Zion was passing through with a tray when he saw the bottle. He paused, just for a half-second, then kept walking, but Caius caught it. Later, after the guest left, Caius found Zion in the kitchen washing the last of the glasses. He picked up the wine bottle from the counter, turned it toward him. "You recognize this," Caius said. Not a question. Zion didn't look up from the sink. "It's a decent Barolo." "That's not what I said." A beat of silence. The 2011 vintage has a slightly sharper tannin finish than the 2013, Zion said, still not turning around. Someone who knew what they were drinking would have gone for the 2013 if they actually wanted to impress you. Your guest didn't know. He was guessing. Caius set the bottle down slowly. "And you know that how?" Zion turned off the water, dried his hands. "I read." It was a clean answer. Quick, practiced. It was also a lie. That was the moment Caius started paying different attention. The next incident came 4 days later. A mafia-adjacent associate of Caius's, a man named Demetrius Cole, stopped by unannounced. Demetrius had a habit of testing new staff. He said something in Italian as Zion passed through the front hallway. Something low and pointed, the kind of comment designed to be rude precisely because the target wouldn't understand it. Zion's step didn't falter, but his hand tightened briefly on the tray he was carrying. He understood every word. Caius saw it. Demetrius saw it too, and by the slight widening of his eyes, the realization wasn't comfortable for him. After Demetrius left, Caius found Marcus in the security office. "Run the Italian connection," he said. "Family lines, international registry, anything." "I already hit walls on the North American search," Marcus said. "Then go international." Marcus looked at him. "You think he's foreign national?" "I think," Caius said carefully, "that he's something we haven't named yet." The third incident was the one that cut deepest. Caius had a private call with his head of building security about a vulnerability in the East Wing elevator system. Technical, internal, the kind of conversation he had behind closed doors with the volume low. That evening, Zion quietly rearranged Orion's bedroom routine to keep the boy on the west side of the penthouse after 8 p.m. He offered no explanation. Caius didn't ask for one. He went back to his office, pulled Zion's background file, and spread every page across his desk. Work history clean. References verified. Education accounted for. But the spaces between the lines, the gaps where a full human life should have been, were empty. No medical records before 5 years ago. No tax history prior to a certain date. No family listed anywhere. No city of birth that matched his accent, which shifted almost imperceptibly depending on who was in the room. Marcus knocked and entered without waiting. "I found something." He placed a photograph on the desk. Grainy. Surveillance grade. A charity event, somewhere overseas. Men in expensive suits circling a table. And there, at the edge of the frame, a younger face. A very recognizable younger face. "That's him," Caius said. "Yeah," Marcus said. Standing next to Eduardo Ricci. Caius looked up. Eduardo Ricci, who had controlled half of Southern Europe's underground financial network for 15 years before his organization was dismantled in a federal sweep. Who had one son, an Omega heir who disappeared 3 years ago under circumstances nobody in the intelligence world had ever fully explained. Presumed dead. Never confirmed. Caius looked at the photograph for a long time. "Don't move on this yet," he said. "Don't let him know we found it." Marcus nodded and left. Caius sat alone with the photograph. In the kitchen down the hall, he could hear Zion humming softly. Something with no name, no lyrics, while he prepared Orion's evening cup of warm milk. Calm. Ordinary. Like a man who had never once stood in a room with one of the most dangerous people in Europe. And somewhere in the building, in a drawer, in a coat pocket, somewhere Caius hadn't found yet, was whatever Zion Vale was still carrying from that life. The question wasn't whether it existed. The question was what it was going to cost them all when it surfaced. They came in through the service entrance at 11:47 p.m. 4 of them, dressed like building maintenance. ID badges that passed the lobby scan because someone had either bribed or replaced the overnight security coordinator. A detail Marcus would spend the next 72 hours unraveling with a fury that scared his own staff. The penthouse alarm triggered at 11:52. By 11:53, Caius was already out of his chair. He moved through the hallway toward Orion's room first. Instinct, not strategy. But stopped at the corridor intersection when the lights cut out. Emergency backup lit the floor a cold blue. Voices. Ground level of the penthouse. At least 2. Then a third closer. He reached for the panic button on his watch. A direct line to Marcus's personal phone, and pressed it twice. What happened next, Caius would replay in his head for weeks. From the far end of the corridor, Orion's door burst open. Not because of the intruders, because Zion had heard them first. He came out of that room already moving, no hesitation, no half-second of processing. And he was heading toward the sound, not away from it. He had Orion tucked against one arm and was moving low and fast and quiet in a way that Caius had never seen anyone move outside of a tactical training video. He got Orion to the linen closet at the end of the hall, said something in the boy's ear that was too low to hear, pushed him gently inside, and closed the door. Then he turned around and walked back toward the threat. Caius stepped out of the shadow. Zion! Zion held up one hand. Sharp, quiet. Caius stopped. He had never in his life stopped for an employee's hand signal. He stopped now. The first man came through the hallway entrance fast. Rushing, not cautious, which meant he wasn't expecting resistance. That was his mistake. Zion sidestepped the charge with a precision that belonged in a different conversation entirely, controlled the man's momentum, and redirected him into the wall so cleanly that the sound of impact was over before Caius's brain had fully registered the movement. The man went down, didn't get back up. The second one was smarter. He stopped at the hallway entrance and assessed. His eyes moved to Caius first. The obvious target then shifted back to Zion. And his face changed. Not fear. Something else. Something slower and stranger. He stared at Zion across the blue-lit corridor, and his voice dropped to almost nothing when he said it. "We thought you were dead." 3 words. The air in the hallway changed completely. Zion's body didn't move. His feet didn't shift. His hands stayed loose at his sides. But his breathing changed. Just slightly. Just enough. The third and fourth men arrived before anything else could happen, and Marcus's team came through the service stairwell 30 seconds behind them. It was over in under 2 minutes. All 4 restrained, zip-tied, on the floor. The building's security team, 6 men, all trained, all ex-military, stood in the hallway afterward and said absolutely nothing. They looked at Zion, and none of them quite knew what to do with what they'd just seen. Caius crossed the hall and opened the linen closet. Orion was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to his chest, holding 3 paper cranes he'd apparently grabbed on his way out of his room. He looked up. His eyes went past Caius immediately, searching, not settling, until they landed on Zion, who was crouching down to eye level. Orion exhaled, uncurled, reached out and held Zion's wrist with both hands and didn't let go. Caius watched this from 3 feet away and felt something shift in his understanding of what was happening in his own home. He stepped closer to Zion when Orion finally drifted to sleep against the nanny's shoulder, still in the hallway, still holding those paper cranes. What he said, Caius started. Zion looked at the floor. That man knew you. Yes. He said they thought you were dead. Zion didn't answer. Caius studied the side of his face, the careful stillness there. The way Zion was holding a sleeping 7-year-old against his chest like a man who understood, on a very deep level, exactly what it meant to protect something. Who are you really? Caius said. Zion was quiet for a long moment. Then, barely above a whisper, someone who got out. Caius waited for the rest. It didn't come. But at the far end of the hallway, one of the restrained men was still conscious, still watching, and as Marcus's team began moving him toward the elevator, he looked back at Zion one more time and smiled, like he knew exactly how this story was going to end. 3 days after the attack, Zion stopped sleeping. Caius knew because the kitchen light came on at 2 a.m. 2 nights running and the monitors showed the same thing each time. Zion sitting at the island counter with a cup of tea that went cold, staring at nothing. Not scared, not panicked, just remembering something. And whatever the memory was, it sat heavy. On the 4th day, Caius walked into the kitchen at 6 a.m. and found Zion already there, back turned, watching the city come to light through the window above the sink. Sit down, Caius said. Zion turned, registered the tone. And for once, for the first time, he didn't redirect or deflect or offer to make breakfast instead. He sat down. Caius sat across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Caius placed a single sheet of paper on the counter between them. Printed photograph. The surveillance image. Zion at a European charity event, standing beside Edoardo Ricci. Zion looked at it for a long time. How long have you had this? He said. Long enough. Another silence. His name was Edoardo Ricci, Zion said finally. He was my father. Caius didn't react, didn't move. I was raised inside his organization. From the beginning. I knew what it was, what he was, by the time I was 12. I told myself it was complicated, that there was good in it somewhere. A pause. There wasn't. He turned the photograph face down. When I was 24, I found documentation connecting his operation to 3 political assassinations and the trafficking of 17 individuals across Eastern Europe. I pulled the evidence. Went to the right people. Quietly. His voice was flat now. Not emotionless, controlled. There's a difference. What I didn't know was that 2 of the people I went to were already in his pocket. Caius was very still. They told him before the week was out, and then everything moved very fast. Zion looked at the counter. My accounts were frozen. My name was connected to crimes I hadn't committed. The family's legal team buried me in documents before I could get to anyone who would actually listen. And then one evening I came home and my apartment had been... He stopped. Started again. There were men inside. You got out. Barely. He looked up. I ran. I changed my name. I stayed low and stayed useful and stayed invisible because the moment I became visible again, whatever my father's remaining allies decided to do, it wouldn't just be me anymore. He said the last part quietly, but his eyes moved down the hall, toward Orion's room. You stayed as a nanny, Caius said. Not to hide. To stay close enough to watch. To watch Ronan vex, Zion said. He's the man who funded the operation against me. He's also the man who has been running a quiet acquisition campaign against Blackthorn Industries for the past 8 months. He looked at Caius directly. You're not just a coincidence. You're his next target. I needed to understand why. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the city was fully awake now. Noise and light and ordinary life happening 60 floors below like none of this existed. And do you, Caius said, understand why? Zion nodded slowly. Ronan doesn't want your company, he said. He wants to erase what you know. There's a transaction, a financial record, buried inside a Blackthorn subsidiary from 6 years ago. A transaction your late husband unknowingly processed. It connects Ronan to one of the political murders I found documentation on. Caius's jaw tightened. Your late husband didn't know what he was processing, Zion said quickly. He was clean. Completely. But the record exists under your company's name. Which means you're the loose end. Silence. A long one. So you came here to use me, Caius said. Zion looked at him. I came here, he said, because Orion was in the file too. Ronan had a note about the boy. About leverage. His voice didn't shake, but something behind his eyes shifted. I came here because I wasn't going to let a child become a target if I could stand between them. Caius held his gaze. He believed him. That was the unsettling part. He had built an entire career on detecting manipulation, on separating the authentic from the performance, and right now, looking at this man across his kitchen counter at 6 in the morning, he believed every word. Marcus is going to want to move you out of the building, Caius said. I know. I'm going to tell him no. Zion blinked. You know what you're dealing with now, Caius said. And so do I. Running you out of here doesn't change Ronan's plan. It just removes the one person in this building who already has a map of how his operation works. He stood up, picked up the photograph. From this point, you don't hide from me. Whatever you know, I know. Whatever you find, I find. He was almost to the doorway when Zion spoke. You trust me. It wasn't a question exactly. More like a man testing the weight of something unexpected. Caius didn't turn around. I trust what I've watched, he said. And I've watched more than you know. He left the kitchen. Behind him, he heard Zion let out a slow, careful breath, like a man who'd been holding it for 3 years. And somewhere down the hall, Orion was waking up, calling for paper, calling for Zion, calling with the open certainty of a child who had somehow decided, against all available evidence, that the people around him were safe. The boy wasn't wrong. But he also didn't know yet that outside this penthouse, a man named Ronan Vex had just received a report. A report confirming that the person he'd been hunting for 3 years was no longer hiding. Caius stopped eating dinner alone. Nobody announced it. Nobody made a rule. It just started happening. Zion would set 3 plates instead of 2, and Caius would sit down, and Orion would climb into his chair between them like that was always how it was supposed to be. 3 weeks after the attack, the threat outside hadn't moved. Ronan Vex was still out there. Marcus was still running surveillance. The investigation was still crawling forward through layers of shell companies and buried records. But inside the penthouse, something else was happening. Something quieter and harder to name. It started with small things. Caius asking Zion's opinion on a security protocol and actually listening to the answer. Zion staying past Orion's bedtime to sit in the living room while Caius reviewed contracts. Not because anyone asked him to, just because he did. Orion falling asleep between them on the couch on a Sunday afternoon while a movie neither of them was watching played on the screen. Caius would catch himself noticing things. The way Zion's shoulders dropped when he thought no one was looking. The way he laughed, genuinely, at something Orion said, and how the sound of it filled whatever room it happened in. The way he always put his teacup in the same spot on the counter. Small. Exact. Like a man who'd spent years making himself small enough to disappear and had kept the habit even now. He noticed all of it. He didn't say any of it. Then Marcus called him into the security office on a Thursday evening and closed the door. Ronan's people made contact with 2 of our board members, Marcus said, quietly, offering acquisition terms. He pulled up a screen. This isn't a hostile takeover attempt. It's a dismantling plan. He wants the subsidiary records buried, the board divided, and this penthouse empty. Caius looked at the screen for a long time. How long do we have before he moves publicly? 3 weeks. Maybe 4. Caius nodded, said nothing else, walked back to the main floor. Zion was in the kitchen making Orion's evening snack. Something with peanut butter and apples and honey arranged in a pattern that made the boy laugh every single time. Ordinary. Domestic. Completely at odds with the conversation Caius had just walked out of. He stood in the kitchen doorway. Zion looked up, and for a moment, just a moment, neither of them said anything. The kind of silence that isn't empty, the kind that has weight. Then Caius said it, quietly, no lead-up, no strategy. I watched you dance that night. Zion went very still. The first night. The kitchen. Midnight. Caius kept his voice even. I was in the security room. You didn't know I was home. Zion set down the knife he was holding. Slowly. I watched for almost 15 minutes, Caius said. And I've been trying to figure out since then why someone like you, with everything you clearly come from, chose to be here. Zion turned to face him fully. And this time the mask didn't come back. Not completely. I already told you why, Zion said. You told me about Ronan, about the records, about the strategy. Caius stepped into the kitchen. That's not what I'm asking about. Zion held his gaze. A long beat passed. The dance, Zion said quietly, was my mother's. She taught it to me when I was small, before everything became complicated. He looked at the counter. It's the only thing from that life I kept that was actually mine. The kitchen was very still. Orion's voice came from the other room, calling for his snack, calling for Zion, the way he always called for Zion now. Zion started to turn. Caius said, You're not invisible here. Zion stopped. Didn't turn back around. But his hand found the edge of the counter and held it. Just for a second. Then he exhaled, picked up the plate, and walked toward Orion's voice. Caius stayed in the kitchen alone, and realized that somewhere between the security monitors and the midnight dance and the 3 plates at the dinner table, he had stopped watching Zion Vale from a distance. The package arrived on a Monday morning. No return address. Hand-delivered to the building's front desk at 7:04 a.m. by a courier no camera ever captured clearly. The lobby security flagged it and called Marcus, who brought it upstairs sealed and called Caius before opening it. They opened it in the security office with Zion present. Inside the padded envelope was a single photograph, burned at the edges, like someone had held a flame to it and stopped just before it was gone. The image was of Zion, younger, maybe 21 or 22, standing outside a building that Caius didn't recognize but Zion clearly did, because when he saw it, his face went flat in a way that was worse than fear. Flat meant he knew exactly what it meant. On the back, written in red marker in a straight, unhurried hand, next time the child. Marcus reached for it. Zion got there first. He held the photograph and didn't speak for a full 15 seconds. The room was silent except for the low hum of monitor fans and the distant sound of Orion in the kitchen asking the morning housekeeper where Zion was. He's escalating, Marcus said. This isn't pressure. This is a message about sequence. I know what it is, Zion said. His voice was quiet. Too quiet. That was the thing about Zion that Caius had come to understand over these past weeks. The quieter he got, the more dangerous the situation actually was. Loud people broadcast their fear. Zion went silent the way a city goes silent before something breaks. Orion needs to be moved, Zion said. Different floor, different routine. No public appearances for at least 2 weeks. Agreed, Caius said immediately. I also need access to your full financial subsidiary records. Not summaries. The actual transaction files from 6 years ago. Marcus looked at Caius. Caius nodded. And I need 48 hours, Zion said. To do what? Marcus asked. To build something Ronan won't see coming. He set the photograph face down on the desk and walked out of the security office. Marcus turned to Caius. You trust him with our full financial records. It wasn't a question. It was barely a sentence. More like a man staring at a fact he couldn't fully process. Yes, Caius said simply. He could destroy us with that access. He could have destroyed us 6 weeks ago, Caius said. He didn't. He picked up the burned photograph and looked at the message on the back. Ronan had him erased once already. Lost him. Spent years looking. And now he's threatening a 7-year-old. He set it down. That tells you everything about who Ronan is. And everything about why Zion is the right person to end this. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, what happens if Zion's plan fails? Caius walked toward the door. Then we do it my way, he said. And my way is a lot less clean. He stepped out into the hallway. Orion was coming toward him from the kitchen. Still in pajamas, paper crane in one hand, looking for Zion with the focused determination of a child who had decided, very simply, that certain people were necessary. Where's Z? Orion asked. Working, Caius said. He crouched down to the boy's level. You want breakfast? Orion studied him, then held out the paper crane. I made this one for Z, he said. But you can hold it. Caius took the tiny paper bird with both hands, and stood there in the hallway of his own penthouse feeling something crack quietly open in his chest. Down the hall, behind a closed door, Zion was already at a desk with 6 years of financial records spread across a screen. Already building the architecture of something careful and precise and devastating. He worked through the night. Caius knew because he checked the monitors, and because the kitchen light stayed on until 4 a.m. And because sometime around 3 in the morning, Caius walked down the hallway, left a fresh cup of hot coffee outside the door without knocking, and walked back to his room. In the morning the cup was gone. No note. None needed. But somewhere in the city that night, Ronan Vex made a decision that changed the timeline. He sent word to 3 board members. The gala was being moved up, 2 weeks earlier than expected, which meant Zion had 6 days, not 48 hours, to finish what he'd started 3 years ago. The Grand Callaway Hotel ballroom held 400 people. Politicians, corporate heads, 2 sitting judges, a senator whose name appeared in enough headlines that his security detail outnumbered most of the waitstaff. And scattered through the crowd like stones dropped into still water, men whose names didn't appear in headlines at all. Those were the ones that mattered. Caius walked in at 8:12 p.m. with Zion beside him. Not beside him the way staff walks beside an employer. Beside him, same pace, same line. The kind of positioning that said something without announcing it. The room noticed. Heads turn the way heads turn when something doesn't match the expected pattern. Whispers moved through clusters of guests like current. People who recognized Caius Blackthorne, and most of them did, looked at the man next to him and tried to place the face. Some couldn't, some could. And those were the ones whose expressions shifted. Zion wore a black suit that fit like it had been made for him specifically, which it had. Caius had arranged it without explanation 3 days ago, and Zion had accepted without asking why. He moved through the room with the kind of ease that doesn't come from comfort. Comes from training. The kind of person who learned how to enter a room full of power before they learned how to drive. This was his world once. He remembered every rule. The first hour passed in the language of these events. Drinks, handshakes, careful conversations that meant 3 different things depending on who was listening. Caius worked the room the way he always did. Zion stayed close, said very little, observed everything. At 9:30, Ronan Vex arrived. He was taller than Caius expected, broader, the kind of man who had aged into his authority. Silver at the temples, a suit that cost more than some people's cars, and eyes that moved across a room the way a searchlight moves across water. They found Zion in 4 seconds, across the ballroom, through a crowd of 400 people. For seconds, Ronan Vex stopped walking. Zion didn't move, didn't flinch, just held the man's gaze from across the room with an expression so controlled it looked almost like calm. It wasn't calm. Caius knew the difference now. Things moved fast after that. Ronan crossed the room, not toward Zion, but toward a cluster of board members near the east wall. Caius watched him shake hands, smile, say something that made the group laugh. Then Ronan leaned in to one board member, Harrison Cole, who Caius had known for 11 years, and said something low. Something that made Harrison's smile go stiff. Harrison looked up, found Caius across the room, and looked away. "He's moving the board tonight," Zion said quietly beside him. "Not next week. Tonight." "I see it. We need to go now," Zion said, "or we lose the room." Caius looked at him. "You're ready. I've been ready for 3 years." He turned and walked toward the main presentation screen at the front of the ballroom. Caius signaled his team with 2 fingers. Marcus, positioned near the AV setup, received the signal and moved. 30 seconds later, the presentation screens on all 4 walls of the Grand Callaway ballroom flickered. The dinner conversation stopped. The screens changed. What replaced the decorative hotel branding was a document. Then another. Then a financial record with names and account numbers and transaction dates. Then a photograph. Then a video file, 32 seconds of audio, a phone call, a voice that several people in the room recognized immediately. Ronan Vex's voice. The room went silent the way rooms go silent when something irreversible just happened. Ronan turned slowly, found Zion at the front of the room. His face did something complicated that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite surprise and landed somewhere in the range of a man watching a wall he built fall down. A senator's aide was already on a phone call. 2 board members were already moving away from Ronan's cluster. The whispers started, not the social kind. The other kind. The kind that travel and don't stop. Ronan took 3 steps toward the front of the room. "You're dead," he said, loud enough to carry, low enough to be ugly. "I watched you disappear. I had confirmation." The room heard it, every word. Zion looked at him from the front of a silent, stunned ballroom, and didn't raise his voice at all. "The confirmation was wrong," he said. Ronan stopped. "And so was every decision you made after it." The senator's aide was no longer just on a phone call. 2 men in dark suits had appeared at the ballroom's main entrance. Ronan looked at them, looked at the screens still cycling through 3 years' worth of documented evidence, looked at the board members now actively creating distance from him in real time. He turned back to Zion. "Why?" he said. The single word had something raw in it, something that wasn't in the polished surface he'd walked in with. "You could have come back, reclaimed everything. You had the name, the lineage, the access. Why throw that away to?" He looked around, caught himself. "To what? Play house." The room waited. Zion didn't answer immediately. He stood there in a black suit in the middle of 400 people and let the silence build for exactly as long as he wanted it to. Then he looked at Ronan Vex and said, "Because rebuilding a child is more meaningful than ruling an empire." Nobody moved. The words landed and stayed. Ronan's expression shifted one final time into something Caius had never seen on a powerful man's face. Complete and total loss. Not of an argument, of a framework. The men in dark suits reached Ronan before he could respond. The ballroom erupted. And Caius, standing 20 feet back, watched Zion exhale slowly. Once, like a man setting down something he'd been carrying for a very long time. The charges came fast. Financial fraud. Wire fraud. 2 counts connected to the political assassination documentation Zion had pulled from his father's files years ago and preserved across 3 encrypted servers across 2 countries. Conspiracy. Obstruction. The list kept growing through the night and into the following morning as authorities who had apparently been building a parallel case, quietly, carefully, finally had the public evidence to move. Ronan Vex was taken into custody at the hotel. His legal team arrived within the hour. It didn't matter. The records were already public. The audio was already circulating. 3 board members had already given voluntary statements by midnight, which meant the wall had not just cracked. It had come down all at once, and the people who'd been standing on top of it were now trying very hard to prove they hadn't been standing there at all. Blackthorn Industries stock held, then rose. Marcus called it the cleanest controlled demolition he'd ever seen. He meant it as a compliment. Zion spent the night in a quiet room on the hotel's upper floor going through documentation requests with 2 federal attorneys, while Caius sat in a chair in the corner and didn't leave. Nobody asked him to be there. He stayed anyway. Around 2 a.m., when the attorneys finally stepped out to take calls, Zion leaned back in his chair and pressed both hands against his face and breathed. Just breathed. Caius watched him. "It's done," Caius said. Zion didn't answer right away. "The original case. The charges. My name." He pulled his hands down, looked at the ceiling. 3 years. I kept thinking there would be a moment where it felt finished. Like a door closing. Does it? Zion turned his head and looked at Caius across the quiet room. "Not yet," he said honestly. "That's okay." "Is it?" Caius met his eyes. "Yeah, it is." Another silence. The kind that had started to feel between them less like distance and more like space. Room to breathe. Room to say something real or say nothing at all and have both be acceptable. "Orion's going to want a full report tomorrow," Caius said. "In paper crane form." That surprised a short laugh out of Zion. It was tired. It was real. It was the best sound in the room. "I'll start folding," he said. They got back to the penthouse at 4 a.m. Orion was asleep but had apparently stayed up past his bedtime, because there was a trail of paper cranes on the floor from his bedroom door down the hallway. 12 of them placed in a line like a runway, leading to the kitchen. On the kitchen counter was a drawing. 3 figures. Crayon. Messy and detailed in the way only a child's art is messy and detailed at the same time. 1 tall figure on the left with a serious face and a suit. 1 figure on the right with a small smile and an apron. And between them, a smaller figure with arms stretched wide. Underneath, in Orion's large, careful handwriting, "My family." Zion picked it up, held it with both hands. Caius stood beside him in the kitchen at 4 in the morning looking at a crayon drawing on copy paper and felt something in him settle, deeply, permanently, in a way that all the security in the world and all the power he'd spent a decade building had never once managed to do. "He spelled family right," Zion said quietly. "I know. I've been practicing with him." Zion looked at him. "You practiced the word family with him specifically?" Caius didn't answer that. But he didn't look away either. Zion set the drawing back on the counter carefully, straightened it, smoothed 1 corner with his thumb, and then Caius did something he hadn't planned. He said it. No lead-up, no careful phrasing, no strategy. "Stay." One word. The kitchen was absolutely quiet. Zion turned slowly. Not as the nanny, Caius said. Not as a security asset. Not because of Ronan or the records or anything that's already over. He held Zion's gaze. Stay because Orion drew 3 people and called it his family. Stay because this penthouse has been alive for the first time in 3 years. Stay because... He stopped. Zion was looking at him with an expression that had no mask in it at all. Because I watched you dance, Caius said. And I've been paying attention ever since. The silence stretched. Then Zion said, You're not easy to be around. No. You're stubborn. You overschedule. You check the security monitors more than any reasonable person should. Also, yes. And you left coffee outside a door at 3 a.m. without knocking. You noticed. I notice everything you do. Zion's voice had dropped. I've been trying not to. Caius took 1 step closer. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just 1 step across a kitchen floor at 4 in the morning, with a crayon drawing on the counter and 12 paper cranes on the hallway floor, and a sleeping child down the hall who had already, in his honest, fearless 7-year-old way, decided how this was going to go. Zion didn't step back. And that was the answer. 6 months later, Orion lost his first tooth. He announced it at breakfast with the specific outrage of a child who had not been warned this would happen. Zion documented the gap with a phone photograph. Caius framed the photograph. Orion told both of them they were being dramatic. Then he asked if he could have pancakes to celebrate. He got the pancakes. This was how mornings worked now. Loud. Ordinary. Full. The kind of full that used to feel like a foreign language in this penthouse. Back when the rooms were quiet and the staff moved carefully and a little boy drew birds in a sketchbook he wouldn't let anyone touch. Orion still drew birds. But now he drew people too. Lots of people. The drawings covered an entire wall of his room, which Caius had agreed to and Zion had helped hang, and which Orion explained in great detail to anyone who came through the door. The legal processes moved forward through those 6 months. Ronan Vek's case went to federal court with more evidence than his attorneys could counter. 3 of his associates took plea deals within the first 2 months. The political assassination cases, the ones Zion had documented years ago at great personal cost, were reopened formally. Families who had spent years without answers started receiving them. Zion's identity was restored. His original name returned to legal standing. His inheritance, what remained of it, after years of frozen accounts and deliberate destruction, was partially recovered through a civil process that took 4 months and a very patient attorney. He donated most of it. Caius found out from the attorney, not from Zion. When he brought it up, Zion shrugged and said he didn't need it. Caius let it go. He was learning slowly that Zion measured things differently than most people. That he had spent 3 years in rooms where power was everything and come out the other side believing it was almost nothing. That the things he held carefully, a child's drawing, a cup of coffee left outside a door, a paper crane made by small hands, those were the things he actually counted. Caius was beginning to count them too. The penthouse changed in ways nobody formally announced. Zion's books appeared on the living room shelves. His jacket on the hook by the door. His handwriting on the grocery list on the refrigerator. Always written in neat columns. Always including Orion's specific requests. Always including something Caius liked that Caius had never once mentioned out loud. He noticed, said nothing, felt everything. On a Tuesday evening in the 4th month, Caius came home from a board meeting to find Zion and Orion in the living room. The boy asleep across Zion's lap, a half-finished book open on the cushion beside them, the evening light going gold through the high windows. Zion looked up when Caius walked in. No caution, no performance, no mask, just there, present, at home in the truest sense of that word. Caius sat down on the other side of Orion. The boy stirred, murmured something, and resettled with one hand reaching out until it found Caius's sleeve. The three of them sat in the quiet living room as the city went dark outside. Nobody needed to say what it was. It just was. Then the 6th month arrived. And with it a letter came through Zion's legal team, unmarked outside the attorney's envelope. No sender name, but the handwriting on the inner envelope was deliberate, old-fashioned, careful in the way that people are careful when they want to be remembered. Zion opened it alone, standing in the kitchen, and read it twice. Then he sat down. The letter contained two things: a photograph and a single paragraph. The photograph was of the penthouse. Not recent, taken from outside through a long lens at an angle that suggested a building across the street. But the timestamp in the corner was from the week Zion first arrived. Before anyone knew who he was. Before the investigation. Before the attack. Someone had been watching from the very first day. The paragraph read, "You were never as hidden as you believed. I made sure you were safe anyway. When you're ready to know why, you know where to find me." No signature. Just a single initial. Zion stared at the photograph for a long time. His hands were steady. But his expression, for the first time in 6 months, had gone completely still. Because the angle of that photograph. The building it was shot from. He knew that building. He'd walked past it twice a week for 6 months. Because it was Orion's school. Caius walked into the kitchen and found him sitting there. Letter on the counter. Photo in his hand. Saying nothing. Zion. Zion looked up. And Caius, who had spent 3 years learning to read people who didn't want to be read, saw something he'd never seen on this man's face before. Not fear. Not calculation. Genuine uncertainty. "Someone knew," Zion said quietly. "From the beginning. Someone inside the circle, not Ronan's side." He set the photograph down. "Our side." Caius looked at the photo, at the timestamp, at the school building in the background. Something moved behind his expression. "How long have you known?" Zion asked. Caius was quiet for exactly 1 beat too long. Zion saw it. He stood up slowly. "Caius." "There are things," Caius said carefully, "that I didn't know how to tell you when we didn't know each other. And things that became harder to say the more certain I became that you were going to stay." The kitchen felt very small suddenly. "Who sent the letter?" Zion said. Caius held his gaze. And said the name. Zion's breath left him completely. Because it was someone he trusted. Someone who had been inside this household since before he arrived. Someone who had, apparently, been holding a secret that changed the entire shape of the story. Not just Zion's story, but the story of how Caius had found him. Of why Zion Vale's name had been on the list of available candidates at all. Nothing about the arrival had been accidental. Orion's voice came from down the hall. "Papa, Z, come look, I made a new one." Bright and unbothered and completely unaware that the two men in the kitchen were standing in the middle of something that had just rearranged itself entirely. Caius and Zion looked at each other across the counter. The love between them wasn't smaller for this. But the trust had just opened a door neither of them had known was there. And whoever was on the other side of it had been patient. Very patient. And was still waiting. If the story moved you, if you saw something of yourself in Orion's silence, in Zion's long road back, in the kind of love that builds itself quietly in the middle of impossible things, drop a comment and tell us which moment hit you hardest. Was it the midnight dance? The crayon drawing? Or the letter at the end? Your thoughts matter here. This community is built on stories that carry real weight, and your voice is part of what keeps it alive. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story on this channel. Stories that challenge you, move you, and remind you what strength actually looks like. And share this one, because someone in your life needs to hear it today.